Welcome back, Inebri-art. This is Andy again, and I'm excited today because I feel like we haven't had an author on in a long time. And we always try to mix it up, and we tend to get lots of musicians, so it's great to have an author on. Today, I am joined by Mitali Perkins, the author of Rickshaw Girl, which apparently was picked by the New York Public Library as one of the best 100 children's books in the past 100 years. That's a pretty great, you know, title to get.
Yeah, it was a good title. Of course, behind the scenes, one of my good friends was on the committee.
Oh, little nepotism never killed anybody.
We'll just take the title. We'll take the title and
Yeah.
run with it. It sounded good.
Yeah. So you kind of like came across my radar. They're doing PR for, I thought with so there's a movie version of this. I didn't do a lot of research, I'm not gonna lie. But it came out in 2021.
Yeah, it came out in 2021, and of course, it had a soft launch in the theaters. It was an adaptation of my novel because it was the middle of the pandemic, but now it's on streaming, and I think it's being
Oh, okay.
more widely seen. It's just been launched on Amazon on Prime and also Apple TV and several other streaming platforms. So people are seeing it.
Yeah, that explains why they're doing more PR for it then. But so I get lots and lots and lots of PR notices, and I clicked the trailer, and I'm like, wow, it looks really pretty. Like it's very
Yeah.
colorful and beautiful art. And seem to kind of have like a theme that we see a lot. The young lady who poses as a male to kind of like fit in or get a job or do what is. Can you give us just kind of like a rundown of the book?
Yeah, well, the book was it's a shorter, more simpler story than the movie. The producer and the writers of the movie made it into a more of a young adult novel. The book is a chapter book, but it's really essentially the core story is the same. It's a girl in a patriarchal society who is trying to figure out a way to help her family, but there's no real way to work for her to make money, which was the case for my mom, my grandmother. They all grew up in the villages of Bangladesh, very talented women, but really no way to contribute to the economy. And so this girl's trying to figure out a way, and she's also an artist. So she loves art, and art contributing to the family economy doesn't seem like a possibility for her at all. And that theme is carried on in into the movie as well, where she figures out a way for her to be able to do both, which is really a miracle. And I mean, I come from that culture myself, and so I know telling your parents that you're going to be an artist as a full-time career is not something my immigrant parents were that excited about. So I did write that part of myself into that story.
Yeah. Yeah. I gotta say, like my parents actually were very supportive um of that, but so many parents aren't. And I think one of the things that always bothers me the most is the idea of a fallback. Like, oh, have a
Mhm.
fallback. How do you feel about that? Because I've talked to a few musicians that were like, no, no, I think fallback's good, but I feel like it prevents you from really going full bore for your goal.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I can see both sides of that discussion. I know that, the younger people call it side hustles. They have all these things going on, these different streams, and some of my younger friends feels like it feeds those having multiple streams of whether it be economic or creative actually feeds each other. So there's that argument. For me, I've had the fallback of my husband who was financially carrying the fallback, but I did go all in when my second novel was rejected by 22 different publishers, and it took 11 years between my first book and my second novel. And at that point, I decided if I'm not going to give up giving this much opposition, maybe I should be all in. And there was something psychological that happened when I said, now I'm all in. I'm just going to go for it. Give it everything I've got, this career of writing stories for young people. And I think there was something about that single-minded passion that did serve. It was risky. It was
Oh, for
risky.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I get it.
Well, especially because I had immigrant parents who sacrificed a lot to come here, and so they wanted us to be financially successful because they sacrificed financially for us. So it's a little bit more tricky when you have parents that did so much to help you get a great education, and you don't want to. Yes, it felt very risky, but I'm glad I did. I'm glad I went all in.
Do you
Yeah.
feel like they saw that as kind of like you throwing away that opportunity?
I think
Is that what you're?
at first, yeah, I was the third of three girls, in a very son focused culture. So
Mhm.
everybody cried when I was born, and they're like, oh, another girl. Oh,
Oh, that, oh,
yeah, that's all right. My dad always said, this girl will be a blessing to the whole family. And I actually wrote that into Rickshaw Girl because there's two daughters in that book. And I got to have the dad say, this girl will be a blessing to the whole family. So my dad just always thought having daughters was the best. So there was that pressure of, now we're here as three girls, and they wanted us. I always say there were three career options. You could be an engineer as an Indian immigrant. I was born
mhm.
in India. Or you could be an engineer, you could be a doctor, or Andy, you could be an engineer. That was your third choice. And so, yeah, at first my parents were like, you're not going to be able to sustain yourself financially as an artist. So they were worried, but then I think bit by bit they saw that it was my passion and that I was gaining some traction. So, and then now with the movie out based on my book, and I think about 10 years ago, my mom set up a Facebook page that was my fan page of all of our relatives. And now she's very actively managing that Facebook page that has 22 fans of Mitali Perkins. So
That's sweet though.
it's sweet. They're very supportive. Yeah, now,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard thing. I can't even call them kids. I mean, they're both adults now, but like it's that hard line between I want them to be, financially stable and not to struggle and although, but I mean that's not real life, I mean, everyone's gonna have those pitfalls and whatnot. And so it's like my thing is like I just want to be happy. And sometimes that comes in money and sometimes it doesn't. And so
Yeah.
it's really interesting to kind of see them navigate the landscape. And I just feel like they're already doing a better job than I did.
Yeah. Well, I think it was pretty black and white for us. You're this or you're that. Like I'm saying, I think the younger generation has these multiple streams of who they are,
Mhm.
and they feel my younger artist friends feel like, well, if I'm doing investing on the side and I'm learning about the stock market, or if I'm doing, setting up a little business, and I'm doing my art, they have maybe they have like a wider view of their energy and passion, and they're trying different things and they're experimenting, they're living in vans and they're driving across the country and they're doing nature photography, but they're feeling, I think they have a more integrated view of who they are. It's not just about who they are, this is what I do to make money, but this is who I am as a full expression of my humanity. It's really refreshing. I think it's something we didn't have.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's less cookie cutter. Like when I was younger, it's like you graduate, you go to college, you get married, you have a kid. And if you don't go to college, then you're gonna be a loser.
Mm.
And now both of my kids kind of went through this phase where they're like, we're not sure what we want to do. And we don't want to just go into debt while we figure it out. And I'm like, I can't argue that. Like that's, and they got, day jobs and whatnot. And my youngest is now posting on TikTok and getting commissions to do artwork through that. And I'm like, that's great.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think they have a lot more flexibility. They're not as rigid about expectations on themselves. And that leaves room for more creativity, right? When you're not, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't, the stakes don't feel as high. When the stakes are so high for us, then you think, oh, if I get a rejection, or if I get, if I my book doesn't sell, or my record doesn't sell, then I'm never going to be a musician. That just felt high. They were really willing to experiment and take some punches and take some knocks and try some different things, which serves, I think really we can learn from them when it
Oh,
comes
for
to.
sure. Yeah. I mean, that's totally where I ended up. I have so many different revenue streams under my business, and it's
You're sort of like the hero for that generation. If you have
oh,
that, you're like, I have like
whoa,
five, I've got five
whoa.
slides.
Let's not throw the H word around at all.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I think with the movie, it's interesting, Andy, because I've written children's books or books for young adults and teens. I've written all kinds of novels. And there's a certain kind of person that's not impressed by that. They think oh, I'm probably writing about bunny rabbits, or it's not like a literary craft. But if you get into the world of writing for children, it's actually very complex. You have to craft a story within certain parameters and hold a reader's attention. And so it can be a very high level craft task, but
Hmm.
it's looked down on in the world. People say, "Oh, you write children's books." Oh, I write children's books too. It's a very it seems like it's but then when the book became adapted into a film, all of a sudden there's all these like really important dudes, and they're like, "Wow, your book is made into a movie." That they're all of a sudden coming in my social media. All these people that didn't even think of me as a they sort of thought of me as like a little fluffy stuffed animal in
Yeah.
the art world, but now all of a sudden I'm in the art world. So it's kind of interesting to see how something that I've done my whole life, which is create stories for kids, which is a challenging craft, is not very looked on very highly in the world of art.
It's interesting because I see a lot of children's book um authors even locally here, uh and some of it feels like I think people look at it as the individual reading isn't going to be as critical because they're a kid, so it's kind of like a lower bar of entry, which I hate saying because it's not true. But I think people look at it that way, which is where probably some of that comes from. But then you think about like how impactful some of those books can be. Like Dr. Seuss was like huge in my life, in my kids' life. I read it to my kids, and you know, hopefully they'll read them to their kids, and it just goes on and on. It's everyone can think of that book that they read as a kid or a young adult that like impacted them.
Yeah, there's a level of the child reading with their heart and their mind, which makes them maybe a little less discerning in terms of is this good or is this bad? But it also makes them incredibly open to your art and
Mm-hmm.
to be shaped by your art. It's because they don't have that adult cynicism of, well, I can do better, whatever. But so it is a powerful vocation because you're shaping things that are deep inside, almost like a child learns a language better than an adult. In the
Mm-hmm.
same way, I think children receive art in a way that is much more formative for them than an adult. And so, yes, maybe they're a little less like, well, I give this 6 on Rotten Tomatoes, and here's
Yeah.
why. Uh, but they also know a good story when they find one,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we don't give them as much credit as for being attuned to what is good and what is true and what is beautiful. I think that's something that there's an instinct in a child reader that also it maybe they don't have the words to be as critical in a review, but they are critical. They're a hard audience. If you've ever tried to hold the attention of a child with a full story, that's a tough call.
Yeah, because if they're not, they also kind of lose or not lose. They haven't gained that kind of social pleasantries where they'll just be like, "I'm bored,"
Yeah, this
and
sucks.
you'd be like,
It's
"Oh,
dull. You're
yeah."
like, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's true. They don't pull punches. Yeah. Especially
But
teens. When I write my teen novels, they're like, it's
you find
very
teens
raw.
harder than little kids?
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely. I think because little kids have more of the gatekeepers to help them, the parent or the teacher, to read my picture books. But a teen's going to just come straight into that novel with their raw heart. They're in the middle of their own hero's journeys, and it's an unmediated encounter between the book and the teen.
Mm-hmm.
And they want something real. They want something that makes them feel. They want something that is just going to connect with their own very intense hero's journey right then and there. And I find that very challenging. So it's always wonderful when you get a note from a teen who says, I read your book 3 times or something. And you think something about your story resonated with their story and they found a deep connection. So I do cherish those notes.
Is it kind of like I'm just trying to think of like how I've seen teenagers portrayed in movies, and like it always or movies and books and comics and whatever, and it always bothered me because they always, I feel like, played them as little kids. They never accurately Like to me, the most accurate portrayal of teenagers in movies would be Goonies. You
Interesting.
know, they swear, they know stuff, but they don't know a lot. They get into trouble. Like to me, that's kind of like what my experience as like, preteen and teenager was. Like you wanted to be treated like an adult. You couldn't be treated like an adult, but you probably could have been treated like an adult more than people were treating you like an adult. If that makes any sense.
Yes, it does. And that's a good example of a classic movie where it really was true to the teen voice, that movie. Yeah, it's hard to find. I think a lot of times adults forget what it's like to be a teenager um and yeah, how much they can know and receive and experience and how tolerant they are of mess in themselves and in other people. It's a really unique stage of life and we forget. So I love writing for teens because it does keep you aware of that teenager in all of us, really, that's seeking so hard to come of age. We all had to do that.
What do you mean tolerant of mess?
Tolerant of mess, like in think about the movie Goonies. Like there's this tolerance for mistakes, and we were talking about earlier, of this tolerance for experiment and
Mm-hmm.
failure and reinventing yourself. And there's not a lot of like there's less shame. We're as adults, you're sort of like embarrassed because you didn't succeed or you're not. Whereas for teens, I feel like they have this wide open space to be a little messier in their relationships and in their language and their experiences. And so they just sort of shrug a little bit more. I know that it's a hard time to be a teen. I know there's a lot of anxiety and mental health issues, but partly I think it's because adults expect them not to be as messy, you
Yeah.
know, and I think for them when they're just that was a great part of coming of age when we did, because we had this whole sort of secret life away from adults.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, where they didn't
Yep.
know. And then that's what's true in Goonies too. Like they didn't know what was did your mom or dad even know where you were or what you were doing? My
They
parents
thought
didn't.
they did.
Yeah, but in reality, we were
Yeah.
living this whole life they didn't even know. Whereas now, your parents know so much about what you're doing that you have all these parental eyes and expectations, and the rules of adult life are on the adolescent life because all those adult eyes are on them. So
Sure.
I don't know. I think a little secrecy in a teen's life goes a long way.
Yeah, and I mean, I never thought of it, but like you can track your teen with their phone, and I mean, when we were kids, it was like, yeah, I'm gonna be at Scott's house.
That's right. And I know. On the flip side, when someone called the house, my mom would pick up and say, "Oh, where is Mitali? Oh, she has gone shopping for her new underwear." And like reveal one of my friends would be like next day, like, "Oh, how's the house shopping trip?" Yeah, so there was inappropriate contact with my mom and my friends, but yeah, it's different now. I think staying aware of how different it is important for us as adults so that we can, not project our own experiences on them. Yeah.
Yeah, and like I think it was like George Carlin said that kids are like over scheduled. He's like,
Mm.
when he's like, when I was a kid, you like it seemed boring, but at the time you'd be like laying around daydreaming or just out walking around wasting time, hanging out with your
Yeah.
friends.
That is
It's
the best incubator for creativity. I try to put that in my own life now. I really try to have a lot of space and time where I can be bored or not scheduled, because and that means saying no to a lot of things. And I think that's one of the hardest things is realizing that you want to guard that time of boredom.
mhm.
Because right now, like unless you're in the shower or taking a long walk without my phone, there's not a lot of spaces where I can just have that time I used to have when I was a kid. That where your mind can wander and just go without any sort of, yeah, just let your mind just roam freely. You have to be really disciplined to create that space in your life now.
Yeah, I'm not so good at that.
Well, it's funny because some of those old practices from, like Sabbath, putting down your phone
hmm
once a week, fasts. Um, I try to do a Sabbath and I don't put my phone on my nightstand or anything like that. So I try to do some of those disciplines that helps guard my time of boredom slash creativity. I
Yeah,
take retreats. I go by myself on retreats and I don't leave my phone in the car. those
I
kind of
hear
things.
I know quite a few writers that do that sort of thing. That seems to be well. I'm trying to think if I know any artists that do that. Just like a friend of mine at COVID got laid off, and he was a writer, and he went to Spain for like a month and just got like an Airbnb, and he's like,
Oh,
I'm just gonna
oh,
write.
that
And,
sounds amazing.
yeah, and
Barcelona.
his wife was like, yeah, cool, go.
Wow. Well, yeah, it's funny because through I'm seeing musicians come out with new albums now, like even just Taylor Swift's new album that came was written during her time in the pandemic, and other people who are dropping albums. There is a deeper kind of creativity to the work that's emerging out of the pandemic, which I expected, but it's really kind of thrilling to see that people who normally were so busy and had all this had to be on the road, marketing, blah blah blah, they had space and time to be creative and in that couple of years. And I think we're really going to reap the benefits of that in their art.
Yeah, it was a really interesting time because we like recorded a ton of podcasts because no one was doing anything, and it almost was an even split of people who some people found that being like, oh, I have all this time and I'm going to go to the studio or I'm going to, sit at my computer and write every day. And, I even started like dabbling in because I always come up with story ideas, but I'm not a good writer. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to try to write something. And, but a lot of other people were just like in dark places where they're like, I don't
Mhm.
have that kind of creative, you know, energy, whether they, get that energy from like hang out with people or what was like really sapping it out of them. But it was a really interesting time. And
Interesting.
I was
Yeah.
very curious to see what was going to be coming out, like this
Right.
year.
And I feel like the dark times too in the artistic life, eventually if you can recover, get your hand back on the paintbrush or the keyboard or whatever, that those dark times inform the art as well, right?
Oh, for
Because
sure. Yeah.
we had to reflect on our mortality, we had to reflect on it was a time of suffering. And I think suffering, if you look back in history, a lot of the great art came from times where people went through dark times of suffering, even communal times together, whether it be the Russian literature or yeah, I have a feeling it'll pay off in the long run in our art, even if there are those people who didn't create during that time, it'll
Yeah.
still inform their art.
Oh, I think so for sure. And there is something, I've always said it's like I don't know whether it's like the darkness breeds creativity or the other way around. Because there's something about like trying to really struggle and understand. I feel like a lot of creativity is like understanding yourself and being like really honest, and it kind of makes you take a different look at things that,
Yeah, yeah, it's that whole dilemma of the artistic temperament and sensibility that feels things so deeply. And
mm-hmm.
so then you can really suffer deeply, or you can have these great highs and lows. And so then, you're tempted to moderate with some sort of numbing agent or medication, which is perfectly valid.
Yeah.
But then you feel like, well, I'm not going to get those highs. I'm not going to experience the depth of the lows. And how is that going to shape my art if I'm medicated or I'm turning to substances, whether it's, so you always have that question about how much can you tolerate of those highs and lows without exploding? And yet, but then you don't want to just be like, where you don't really actually
Right.
feel anything. That doesn't make you create things that help other people to feel things. So yeah, it's a balance for sure. But I'm so grateful for medication because I know it's helped many of my friends
Oh yeah.
not have those deep lows that take them fully out of the creative game. So yeah, it's
So
yeah. Go ahead.
wrapping back to your book a little bit because we're kind of here to talk about that.
Yeah.
You were talking about a couple times referencing that there's aspects of your character or yourself in your character. Is that like a standard for you? Like, is that part of your writing? Like, you have to have that connection to that character in order to write? Or
Yeah, it's the narcissistic part of being a writer. Everyone is me. Every
yeah,
character. I, yeah, I think that there has to be some connection, with the character. And I know that we're focused right now on identity as the connection, like your cultural identity but there's something deeper. It's whether it's like some struggle with some vice uh or some some virtue that you're trying to, there has to be some connection between your life and the character's life. And so with Naima and the rickshaw girl, there is that dilemma of her wanting to do her art and yet also caring deeply about her family. And I definitely had that. We've talked about that, but that that being caught in, and also her idea that her gender limits her. Um, that was where I was growing up. I was, thankfully my parents, they left the villages of India and Bangladesh, and they, even though there was grief, they didn't have a son. They gave us their best shot to become everything we could be, and that I'm always so grateful for. So yeah, there's definitely parts of her, and that sometimes wondering what would it be like to have the opportunities and privileges of another identity, whether it be male or whatever, is something I think about. I think about when I walk in a room and I'm a brown woman, and I know that that's the body I'm in, and so I'll be perceived like that. What would it be like to come in a different casement or a different? How would that be? So she's thinking about that in the story, and not so much as an issue of gender as it's expressed in American culture today, but as an expression of power, not an expression of who you are, um, what your identity is just because it's coming from within. It's more the power of the gender as it interacts with society and economy that I'm exploring in that story. It's a small, slim story, Rickshaw Girl. You can pick it up and read it with a third grader,
Yeah.
but I try to put in my stories. I try to put a lot of threads of justice and big questions, and that book, I wrote it. I'll tell you, and it was rejected not 23 times like my second novel, but maybe 14 times,
Hmm.
15 times. And I was sitting, my second novel had come out, and I was sitting at an American Library Association conference where I was supposed to be signing books, my second novel. And I was at a table with authors on either side of me. And these other authors were really big names, right? So I had nobody in my signing line. And those two authors had these lines that were just long people. And so it's one of those humiliating moments in the artist's life where you think, okay. So I pulled out my manuscript of Rickshaw Girl to work on it. And
Yeah.
then this red-haired woman from one of the lines caught my eye, and she came out of the line and she said, hey, what do oh, I read Monsoon Summer, which was my second book. Can you tell me about what you're working on? And I had the manuscript right there. And I said, well, I'm working on this manuscript about a girl wanting to drive her dad's rickshaw. She's an artist. And she said, that intrigues me. I'm an editor at Charles Bridge. Could you send it to me? And that's how the book got published, from that moment of deep humiliation.
Yeah.
So I think it's just like showing up, and doors sometimes open. And that book's been translated into 9 languages. It's been made into a stage play. It's my best-selling book by far. I think it's sold like almost 400,000 copies over
Wow. That's
the long
amazing.
haul.
Yeah.
And now it's made into a film. It's reaching cultures, and to me that's so amazing, because I I just really didn't think the story was going to come and see the light of day. And yet here I have a little rickshaw, which your listeners can't see, but it's a little rickshaw given to me by the producer. And I always think, wow, she just pedaled along. She kept going.
Yeah.
And the book had that same kind of feel, because it came out in 2007. And what is it now? 2023.
Yeah.
People
It's
are
been.
watching the movie version of it, and it's still selling. And I still get notes from kids saying, I loved Naima. She's my favorite character. And that's so thrilling for me to know that
That's really cool.
it had a long life. Yeah.
And it's I love that it came out of that kind of, you know uh, you said, I don't want to misquote you, but you said it's kind of like embarrassing where you didn't have anyone in your line.
Humiliating. Yeah.
Humiliating, that was the word you were using. But it is so much of what I experience as success in life comes from those moments where someone's just like, hey, it'd be cool. And you're like, yeah, cool, let's give it a try. And they don't always work. Some of them are downright terrible. But it's just this kind of, I think, if you have that, I'm here, put myself out there. I'm going to use my time to work on my manuscript because, no one's in my line. It's like that mentality of I'm here and waiting. And when the opportunity comes by, you take it.
Yeah, I think that's that, just show up and champion your own work. I feel like I used to just to be aware that the work is the important thing and that your connection to the work matters, and keep going with that relationship between you and your work. It's challenging though, because it's this really, I think most of my career has been a lot of knocks, as all of us who've been doing this for any length of time. There's been lots of bad reviews and rejections, and we've all had our fair share. So I guess the question is, how much do you love this work, and how much were you designed to do this? Is this the way you're going to serve the planet? And if you can say yes to that question, you can just keep showing up, you and the work, and eventually, hopefully it'll stop. There'll be some times where you can rejoice that more people are receiving your art than, just your 22 people in your mom's Facebook group.
And I think there's a little bit about kind of like learning your own patterns and whatnot. Like I've had plenty of failures, but any event that we run, my business partner always gives me a hard time because he'd be like, "Yep, quarter of it's time for Andy to have a panic attack," and I'm walking around be like, "Where is everybody? Why aren't they here yet?" And it's like clockwork. And so now it's kind of like I'll start to feel like that kind of anxiety, and I'll be like, I'm just gonna walk outside for a bit and
Take those breaths.
yeah, go
Yeah.
clear my head, and everything's under control. And kind of the way we run things is like at that point, I think that the thing that makes me the most panicky is I know at that point there's nothing I can do.
But isn't that the most freeing moment?
No.
It's the most panicky moment.
Because it hasn't started, so I can't see how it's going to turn out. But there's
Oh,
really nothing that I can do to change anything at that point. So I kind of get
that
this
to me
like,
sounds like the surrender moment where you said, I've done the best I can. If
yeah,
30 people show up, like it's like at some point you sort of just have to surrender after you've tried as hard as you can, right?
yeah, that usually takes me about like 10 minutes in.
In
But
oh,
like the 15 minutes before is usually when I'm walking around
that's
like,
high panic. Yeah, I
yeah,
get
I'm an unpleasant
that.
person to be around at that time. I get it.
Right. Well, I think it's because we care so much. You created this thing, and it's not just like you don't want to be like Emily Dickinson, like writing these poetry and then like dying, and you don't get to
Right.
connect your work to the person. Maybe you do want to be like Emily Dickinson, but I want to connect. I want my art to mean something to the people receiving it. It's that. So you want that so much that's why the anxiety is so high. Anytime anxiety
Of
is high, it's
course.
because
Yeah.
you care so deeply. But yeah, it's definitely, it's not for people you have to have some nerves of steel in the artistic life.
Yeah, and you have to learn the difference between someone giving you good critical advice and someone just like dunking on you.
Oh, the critiques. Yeah,
Yeah.
we have Goodreads in the writing world, where the review site, that's just brutal. It's brutal.
Oh yeah.
You just don't go there unless you are ready unless you're feeling like you've had a nice cup of coffee or glass of wine or whatever your substance is.
Yeah.
I don't usually go there. Yeah. It's hard to take those critiques. It's hard to know, can I take this and make my craft better? Or is it just someone who's got some issue with this thing? Then that's their problem. Bye bye. See
Right.
you. Yeah.
And it's that fine line between you can't take every critique because then it's like it's not even your work anymore. It's like trying to like pick out like what's the good advice that I should follow and what's the stuff that I should ignore. And yeah, it's not easy.
Well, and I think incubating the work is really important. I don't let anyone read what I'm working on or even talk about it much until it's really in a much more advanced form. If it's something that's come to me when I'm hiking in the hills and I've got this idea, let it sit inside me for a long time, because if it goes out to someone else, then I do care what people think. So
Mm-hmm.
the idea itself needs some time just to be with me and the idea and the story. And then eventually I will, my agent will look at it, but I'm still pretty private about it until, it goes to press. And then the reviewers start to see it. And then I'm like, oh gosh, I want to go hide somewhere. But
Yeah, I didn't like you either. Yeah,
I,
I have artist friends that will take commissions and people will be like, "Oh, can you send me photos?" And they're like, "No." Like you'll see it when it's done.
that's good. I'm glad that's part of the one of the best practices of being an artist is being able to say no. No to, I don't want to, I need more, time around this space. No, I'm not going to share it. No, I'm not going to take that. If you can say no, that's a really good practice.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, when you give it to them and it's done, they're gonna like it just as much, and you're not gonna run into the, well, can you move their arm this way and do that? And you're like, oh, I don't want to do that, you know?
I know. And the movie now, the movie's getting reviews, because it's being seen by a lot of people now. So it's getting it's interesting to read the movie reviews because I'm sort of one step removed. I didn't write the screenplay. They
Right.
use my story. And so I'm cheering hard for the people that were part of the movie. So I'm more maternal about those reviews than I am about my own work because I'm like, those guys worked hard to make this movie. I'm getting all defensive about that movie in a
Yeah.
way that I don't do about my own work because it's I'm just so cheering hard for them, and it's so great to see this little movie made in Bangladesh, all by Bangladeshis, all Bangladeshi screenwriter, director, artist, and to see it being received here in the States. It's the first time it's been a Bangladeshi movie that's actually being received by American audiences, and they're so excited and thrilled and proud that their art is not just the art of the movie, but the folk art of the rickshaw painting and
Hmm.
it's just they're so proud of it, and so I so want it to succeed because it's kind of my giving back to the culture of my origin, to see that if the movie flies, I'll be so thrilled for them. So
Yeah. It,
I
it
never
it does. It
ever.
looks so great. It
It's a
really does.
beautiful movie.
Yeah.
So many colors. They used all of their Bengali sensibility of color and music and feeling. Bengalis, they feel things and they're not ashamed of it. So there's a lot of pathos in the movie. And so, yeah, I'm really grateful. It's when you never dream that one of your stories is going to be fully made into a movie. When Eric Adams, the producer, bought the option, I thought, yeah, right. It's going to,
Yeah.
good luck raising the money to make this little book into a movie. And he did. It was an act of love for him and his wife. They just wanted to see it made, and they worked with Bangladeshis and they honor the culture. It's really a beautiful tribute to the Bangladeshi culture. So I'm really proud of it. And I hope that your listeners get a chance to see it. They can find out more about it at rickshawgirlmovie.com and support the movie makers in
That's
Bangladesh.
awesome. See, I'm such an egomaniac that I'd read the reviews and all the good ones. I'd be like, "That's me. That's me. That oh, the bad one. That's the movie. That's."
Hey, that's an idea. No, I'm really protective of them. I want them to, because they work it's a whole crew, and there's the cinematographers and the costume designers and the artists and the guy who actually did the rickshaw painting. And there's just so much craft, and it's such a community of craftspeople that contributed that I'm sort of like the auntie going, come on, movie. I
You're gonna
really,
start a fan group with 22 people.
that's exactly right. I've become that person. I've become
Yeah.
my mom.
What are you
Yeah.
working on next?
Well, I have books coming out, two books coming out this year. I have a book, as I said, a lot of my books explore justice issues because I studied political science, public policy in college. So this one, so Rickshaw Girls about microcredit and
Hmm.
loans, how loans for girls and businesses can change the world, really, if you give them access to loans. And this one is a book about affordable housing, but it's a middle
Oh,
grade novel, and it's set in California where I
yeah.
live, and our housing situation out here is terrible. So where are you? Where are you? Oh,
I'm located in Plymouth, Mass. I am
oh
sitting.
no, my goodness! I lived in Newton for 12
Oh,
years, so
did
I
you? Yeah. Oh, I'm sitting literally like maybe
no.
100 yards from the Mayflower.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Oh, I missed
So
that.
housing is a huge
Yeah,
problem.
right. I remember in the Boston area the same thing. So this little girl, the house across the street is getting demolished, and she loves going there because she writes.
Hmm.
So she goes secretly to this beautiful orchard and house, and now she's found out it's getting demolished, and so she starts to get involved in all the town politics to see she can save the house because that's her writing space. And I got to use poetry that I wrote when I was 11.
Oh,
I
that's
found
cool.
it in my diaries and I put it. So that book's coming out. It's called Hope in the Valley, July 2023. And then I have a picture book, a Christmas picture book that's coming out in September. So that's this year.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, I mean, that's such. I'm seeing more and more. Um, I guess interest is the right word, but so Plymouth is a very wealthy community, and they're in this issue, and the Cape Cod has gone through the same thing where they're pricing their workers out of the area, and so there's issues where there's not enough people for jobs because there's no
Yeah.
one.
Where do the teachers live? Where do the nurses
Yeah,
live? Where do the police? Not even, we're not even talking about lowest income. We're talking about middle income people getting
right.
priced out. Yeah, that's what I'm looking at in this book. And I mean, it sounds kind of funny, like a children's novel about affordable housing, but
It is.
most,
It's a weird, weird go.
you have to read the story, and so you hopefully have a character, my character Pandita. So it's a personal story because it's a coming of age, very
Mhm.
similar to mine. It's set in 1980 in Silicon Valley, which used to be called the Valley of Heart's Delight because it was all orchards, you know. So
Oh,
I
okay.
came of age at that time, and so it's a very personal story. But for me, it always has to have some sort of a justice, just a nuanced justice question. I wrote a picture book about the border wall between San Diego and Tijuana. Yeah, I'm not writing about fluffy bunnies. I'm not today with bunnies. I may
Okay.
get to a fluffy bunny book at some point, but yeah.
But it's interesting, and I think that kind of like wraps back to I think too many people either shelter their kids or don't think those stuff affects their kids. You know, it's like if there's housing instability, it's like it's going to affect the kids just as much, if not more, because they're the ones who are going to be at school trying to make new friends at the hardest time in their life to kind of learn to socialize, and all that stuff matters to them.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think I was a kid when I was 9, I cared about hunger and poverty. And I believe kids can have they have that they have a heart for justice. I know they do because I've seen them get passionate and riled up about all kinds of things.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I remember um it's one of the proudest moments I was ever of my one of the moments I was ever most proud of my children. So my kids are about 2 years apart. So my son was like losing the last of his baby teeth, and my youngest was just starting to lose their teeth. And I can't remember which. Oh, Zoe had lost a tooth, and so I'm a divorced dad. So I had him on the weekend, and we were kind of like walking downtown and whatnot. And I'm like, "Oh, what are you going to spend your tooth fairy money on?" And she's like, "Oh, I donated it to cancer research." I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "Me and Liam have donated all our tooth money to cancer research." And I'm like, we're all getting ice cream. Like it just like I'm like, I don't know where they got that. I'm not that nice. I don't know. And it was just like they were so sweet and so genuine. It's because my ex-wife's lost a friend to cancer, and they were seeing people raise money, and they figured that's how they could help out. And it's just the sweetest thing. And I'm like, all right,
that's really, yeah, those little things tell so much about what's really the character of a child, right?
yeah.
That's
They're a little more mouthy and sarcastic now, but
as it should be, as
yeah,
it should be. They're finding their voice.
they're still
So
sweet underneath.
definitely, yeah.
Mitali, tell me again, where can people go to check out your book and the movie?
Okay, well, rickshawgirlmovie.com is the movie, and they can find it on Amazon Prime or Apple TV. You can get it at libraries through Hoopla and Canopy. And my book is on my website, MitaliPerkins.com. I'm the only Mitali Perkins on earth, Andy. There's no other combination of that. So if you Google
No, I was
me,
gonna say that can't be true. I'm like, wait,
it
no,
is true.
probably.
Google me, and you will see that Mitali, Mitali, and
Yeah.
Perkins do not combine in any other human being. So you can find me all over. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter. I'm not on TikTok, but
You should be. That's what everyone's telling me.
I know. I know. Well, I figured the best reels from TikTok come over to my Instagram and I see them there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you can find MitaliPerkins.com. All my books are there, and love to talk to other creatives and find some like-minded people who care about art and serving the planet the way that I try to.
It's awesome, Tally. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
That's
And anytime you have something to promote, please feel free to reach out. We'll have you
Oh,
back
that's so
on.
nice.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Enjoy the snow. Enjoy the shoveling.
It hasn't been too bad. Like it snowed last night, but it was only like a couple of inches, and then it like ended in rain, so it was pretty much
Well,
gone this
you're
afternoon.
closer to the coast, and
Yeah.
yeah, I just remember shoveling so much. And now I'm in California.
When did you live out here?
We were there till 2013, so 13
Oh,
years.
you had some. Oh, were you here for
It's
the?
some bad snows, big
I'm trying to
snows.
remember. Like we had that really bad February. Like we had
Yes,
like
they
the
were.
worst winter ever, but it only snowed in February.
I just ate my pain through all those winters.
It takes a
Anyway, well,
different breed to
meet
like it,
you.
but
Yeah, good to
yeah,
meet you, and thank you again for having me on the show. And we'll hopefully meet again someday.
absolutely. Thank you
All
so
right.
much, and thank you to our listeners. Catch you guys again next week.
And thanks for checking out the show today, listeners. If you enjoyed the content today, you can go over to patreon.com/Inebri-art to support the show. You can join over there for just a few dollars a month and help us provide this fun content that you just checked out. You can also email us at Inebri-art.com with your questions, complaints, and concerns, or you can find us on all social medias at Inebri-art or at Inebri-art6 on Instagram. And also don't forget to check out our other shows, Bar Talk Podcast, Old Colony Cast, Inebri-art, and all the other shows on the Inebri-art Network, which you can find at Inebri-art.com. Thanks again for listening.